Stephanie White does a interview with a radio down there in Indiana. Pretty good interview.
What you're about to hear may be the biggest wake-up call professional women's basketball has ever experienced. And it all revolves around a ruthless power move unfolding behind the scenes that almost nobody predicted. For months, the conversation around the league was filled with jealousy, personal grudges, and veterans desperately trying to minimize the cultural explosion that completely changed the sports landscape. But the instant the season came to an end, the narrative shifted overnight. The same executives, longtime coaches, and media personalities who spent the summer telling fans to relax are now scrambling to profit from a massive financial tsunami crashing through the league. Right in the middle of this chaos sits a shocking revelation recently unleashed by none other than Stephen A. Smith. He didn't hold anything back, confirming exactly what passionate fans have been saying for weeks about the blatant hypocrisy spreading throughout league leadership. He exposed a stunning reality involving Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever front office, and an establishment that appears totally disconnected from its own fan base. The obsession with capitalizing on the Caitlin Clark phenomenon has officially reached another level, and the boardroom politics happening right now are beyond unbelievable. But to fully understand how massive this takeover has become, we need to go back and examine the damage that was done inside the Fever organization itself. The earthquake that shook the basketball world began with the sudden and ice-cold dismissal of Christie sides. Imagine guiding a franchise lost in irrelevance for nearly 10 years, surviving one of the most pressure-filled seasons imaginable, and finally leading the team back into playoff contention, only to be pushed aside before the celebration even ended. Despite the rocky start to the year, sides had finally started unlocking the full power of the most electrifying offensive talent college basketball had ever seen. The team was finding rhythm. Chemistry was growing stronger, and fans were finally witnessing meaningful winning basketball after years of frustration. Following the Olympic break, the Fever became one of the most dangerous and exciting teams in the country, turning into an offensive machine capable of scaring even the league's most experienced squads. But the front office wasn't focused on patience, and loyalty clearly meant nothing compared to business opportunity. The moment Indiana was knocked out by the Connecticut Sun, executives realized they were sitting on a billion-dollar empire waiting to explode, and suddenly a hard-working, grinded-out coach no longer fit the glamorous image they wanted. They needed a headline-worthy figure, someone who could command attention at every press conference and effortlessly benefit from the presence of a once-in-a-generation superstar. The firing of sides was not emotional. It was a cold business calculation that showed the Fever had evolved beyond a basketball franchise into a worldwide corporate brand. Yet what happened behind closed doors afterward completely changed the story. Almost at the exact same time chaos erupted in Indiana, another suspicious move was quietly unfolding across the country. Stephanie White, one of the league's most respected and accomplished coaches, unexpectedly cut ties with the Connecticut Sun, sending shockwaves throughout the basketball world. And when you examine it strictly from a basketball standpoint, the decision simply makes no sense. White had built an unstoppable force in Connecticut, building a roster packed with battle-tested veterans, elite defenders, and players completely committed to her tough, defense-first philosophy. Year after year, there remained serious championship threats, coming painfully close to capturing a title after several deep postseason runs. So, why would a coach willingly walk away from a perfectly built contender loaded with stars like Alyssa Thomas and DeWanna Bonner? The answer is both obvious and brutally calculated, and it centers entirely around the enormous spotlight growing in the Midwest. White saw exactly what every ambitious executive around the league was beginning to see. She understood that winning a championship in Connecticut might earn respect and another trophy, but becoming the head coach of the Indiana Fever offered something far bigger: global recognition, nonstop media attention, and control the most valuable brand in women's basketball. It was the perfect opportunity, arriving at exactly the right moment to avoid all the painful struggles someone else had already survived through. The foundation had already been built. The exhausting rookie storm had already passed, and the stage was now completely prepared for a new face to walk in and claim the spotlight for herself. It was a perfectly timed power move, one designed to capitalize on momentum that had already transformed the league forever. It was a calculated shift that didn't sit well with many longtime basketball purists, creating the perfect setup for a massive clash of egos. And just when it seemed like the controversy surrounding this obvious power move had finally cooled down, a huge reality check exploded across national television. Stephen A. Smith, who spent the entire season battling his own peers over the disrespect constantly directed at the rookie superstar, went on air and completely shattered the illusion surrounding the league. He confirmed what loyal grassroots fans have been saying from the very beginning. The old guard has completely lost touch with reality. Smith called out the stunning hypocrisy of a league that spent months pretending it didn't need the attention Caitlin Clark brought, only to suddenly restructure everything behind the scenes once the money and spotlight became impossible to ignore. He specifically pointed toward coaches and executives, including the incoming leadership connected to the Fever, accusing them of being disconnected from the very fan base responsible for creating this financial explosion. During an intense segment, he explained how the WNBA establishment spent the entire year trying to humble Clark, allowing unnecessary physical play on the court, while ignoring the toxic narratives pushed by frustrated veterans through interviews and podcasts. But the second the season ended and the league secured a massive television agreement, those same voices suddenly want to control the future they once tried to diminish. Smith made it absolutely clear that the new leadership is attempting to hijack the story, behaving as though their experience and brilliance are the secret ingredients, when in reality the only thing they truly need to do is stop standing in the way. He also blasted the unbelievable arrogance required to walk into a situation built around a generational talent and behave as though the coaching staff was somehow being presented as the true centerpiece of the story. His comments completely ripped away the disguise surrounding the entire situation, exposing it as nothing more than a frantic attempt by certain figures to stay relevant after initially dismissing the very phenomenon now fueling the league's success. But the outrage had already started building long before Smith ever addressed it publicly. The second rumors of this carefully planned transition exploded across social media. The fan base immediately erupted, and the growing divide between the front office and the paying supporters became impossible to ignore. This new generation of fans, the same people who shattered television ratings, emptied stores of jerseys, and packed arenas all across the country, are deeply loyal to the player who brought them into the sport in the first place. They witnessed every hard foul, every passive-aggressive post-game remark, and every attempt by media personalities to twist the narrative throughout the entire summer. They paid attention to the way established veterans and longtime coaches treated the rookie from day one, acting as though she was an outsider invading their territory, instead of the person helping rescue the league's financial future. So when the announcement surfaced that a veteran coach closely connected to the league's longtime establishment was leaving an elite contender just to take control of the Fever, fans immediately became suspicious. Social media comment sections and basketball forums exploded with accusations that the entire move was nothing more than a giant clout-chasing operation. Many supporters openly questioned why the front office was so determined to hire someone representing the old system instead of searching for a creative, modern offensive strategist capable of fully unleashing the team's fast-paced, high-scoring potential. The frustration comes from a growing belief that executives think the fan base can simply be manipulated. The front office appears convinced that placing a recognizable, respected figure in charge will somehow earn approval from basketball traditionalists, while completely ignoring the fact that this new generation of fans has little trust or affection for the old guard. It represents a massive public relations mistake and further proves how disconnected the decision-makers have become from the people actually spending money on tickets, jerseys, and merchandise. But this divide also exposes an even darker layer beneath the entire controversy. This non-stop coaching drama has become the ultimate confirmation of the jealousy narrative that hovered over the entire 2024 season, validating countless fans who were mocked for pointing it out from the beginning. For months, media defenders insisted there was no resentment, no bitterness, and no targeted hostility toward the league's new superstar. They argued that the hard fouls, the controversial Olympic roster decisions, and the dismissive comments from former players were simply examples of normal competitiveness. But the sudden and aggressive scramble to land the Indiana coaching position completely destroys that carefully protected narrative. If the rookie season had truly been business as usual, then a respected coach like Stephanie White would never leave behind a championship-level roster simply to step into, over a franchise that barely managed to survive past the opening round of playoffs. The truth is that everyone inside the league understands exactly where the balance of power lies, and what once looked like jealousy has now evolved into calculated opportunism. They couldn't overpower her on the court, they couldn't intimidate her physically, and they couldn't derail her through media narratives despite repeated attempts. So the strategy from the old guard has become painfully obvious. If you can't defeat the phenomenon, you position yourself as the authority over it. It is the ultimate power play from an establishment that refuses to relinquish control of the spotlight. Many veterans now want to stand on the sidelines, act composed, and later claim credit when the team eventually succeeds in the postseason. They want history to remember their leadership, their stability, and their strategic influence as the reason everything finally clicked. It is a clear attempt to redirect attention and reclaim dominance over a player whose explosive popularity disrupted the entire system from the very beginning. But as these moves unfold, the real motivation behind them becomes harder to hide. At its core, every decision in this high-stakes power struggle is driven by financial gain and the pursuit of corporate control. The league's massive new television rights agreement, worth billions, completely reshaped the business landscape, and everyone knows exactly who made that expansion possible. Ticket sales, broadcast deals, sponsorship growth, and merchandise surges have created an unprecedented financial boom for the Indiana franchise. For executives and coaches alike, aligning with this team is no longer just a professional opportunity. It is a pathway to enormous wealth, influence, and long-term security. The return of leadership figures to the Fever front office, along with the swift restructuring of the coaching staff, represents a ruthless but highly calculated effort to secure control over this revenue surge. Executives understand that if they fail to act quickly, the narrative will escape their grasp and the players themselves will become bigger than the organization. Their fear is a future where athletes hold all the leverage, dictating terms while the front office fades into the background. By bringing in a proven, high-profile head coach, the front office is trying to construct a protective barrier of authority. They want corporate sponsors and broadcast partners to see a stable, traditional organization led by experienced figures, not a chaotic spectacle revolving around one extraordinary talent. It is a clear effort to package a spontaneous cultural movement into a controlled business product. And in doing so, they seem ready to sacrifice loyalty and clear out anyone who doesn't fit the plan. But this risky strategy carries a serious danger that could eventually backfire. To understand how fragile the situation really is, you have to examine the psychological transformation taking place among the fan base. These are no longer quiet, passive spectators who simply applaud structured defensive plays. This is a new generation of highly engaged supporters who operate like a digital force, ready to defend their star against any criticism. When Stephen A. Smith stepped in and called out the establishment for being out of touch, he was echoing frustration of millions who feel dismissed and underestimated. Fans interpret Stephanie White's arrival not as a neutral coaching change, but as an invasion by the same system they believe tried to undermine their favorite player. They remember the podcast comments from veteran players who mocked a rookie's impact, and they recall press conferences where coaches refused to acknowledge what was happening on the court. So when a prominent member of that coaching circle suddenly arrives in Indianapolis to take over, suspicion rises immediately. Many fans fear the new staff will try to slow down the fast, free-flowing style that made the team so exciting in the latter half of the season, replacing creativity with rigid control, like adding limits to a high-performance machine just to assert authority. This concern is not random. It comes from a year of perceived disrespect and condescension from the league toward its newest audience. And as the off-season continues, the pressure only intensifies. The consequences of this disconnect go beyond coaching decisions and reach into the very structure of the franchise's future. Even the contract situation of Kelsey Mitchell, a key veteran behind the Fever's late-season improvement, becomes part of a much larger and more complicated puzzle involving salary cap pressures, free agency uncertainty, and roster construction decisions. Construction while operating under the most extreme level of scrutiny the sport has ever seen. Fans want a roster carefully built to maximize the strengths of their generational point guard. They expect rim-running forwards, elite catch-and-shoot players, and athletes capable of handling lightning-fast transition passes without turning them over. The concern, however, is that an old-school coach like White paired with traditional executive like Krakoff will try to assemble a slow, physical, half-court-oriented roster that ignores the modern pace and space reality of today's game. If the front office starts leaning toward aging veterans who dominate possession instead of athletic floor spacers who thrive in transition, it will feel like confirmation of everything Stephen A. Smith has been saying. It would suggest that decision-makers in the boardroom care more about following established norms than maximizing the once-in-a-generation talent they've been given. The idea of slowing down the most explosive offensive force in the league is something fans view as almost unthinkable. Yet, that fear feels grounded when you look at how established leagues historically respond to disruptive talent. Every time a new style changes a game, the immediate reaction from the old guard is to contain it. We saw it during the early rise of the three-point revolution, when traditional coaches dismissed it as a gimmick until it completely reshaped basketball strategy. What's unfolding in Indiana now feels like a corporate version of that same defensive instinct, with executives and legacy coaches attempting to contain a phenomenon that has become more influential than the league itself. Stephen A. Smith's commentary resonated so strongly because he understands the entertainment side of sports at a deep level. He knows fans aren't tuning in for a perfect execution of structured systems. They're watching for moments of brilliance, deep shots, creative passing, and the kind of confidence that breaks convention. When he criticizes a new leadership as out of touch, he's essentially warning that they are risking an entire audience by trying to control something built on spontaneity. If they attempt to sanitize the product or force the star into a rigid system designed for another era, they risk alienating the very fan base that revived the league's relevance. The idea that the front office believes it can tightly control a cultural movement is staggering, and it leads directly into what will be the most closely watched training camp in the history of women's sports. And the consequences of failure feel almost catastrophic. As the dust settles on this unprecedented power shift, the Indiana Fever find themselves standing on dangerously unstable ground. They have carried out a ruthless front office transformation, removing the blue-collar coach who absorbed the pressure and handled the toughest responsibilities in his place. They've opened the door for a high-profile, polished name who can command attention on camera and absorb the spotlight. But in doing so, they've also painted a massive target on their backs. Stephen A. Smith's sharp criticism of these decision-makers isn't just another sport hot take. It reads like a serious warning about what happens when leadership loses touch with its audience. Fans are now tracking every move with growing suspicion and zero patience for spin. They understand exactly why this coaching change was made. They recognize the motivations behind it, and they are not easily swayed by corporate messaging or carefully crafted PR narratives. If this new regime comes in and attempts to impose a rigid system,